Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another edition of the Infinite Multihued. I'm your host, as usual, Francisca, and today we have with us Kai Northcott. They are someone I met on LinkedIn, and it was quite going through their LinkedIn profiles and posts. I observed a lot of things that I liked and I learned from, and so I reached out to them asking if we could have this podcast session. And I got a very positive feedback. So today we are here with Kai. I would allow them introduce themselves to us and we'll take it up from there. Hi Kai, can you introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I guess just to start really broad, I I was diagnosed autistic about 3 years ago. I love to bike, hike, and canoe. I'm obsessed with a game called Go, which is the oldest continuously played board game in the world. I have a little pup named Frankie who is making herself
Oh,
very at
so
home in
cute.
my lap right now. And what I'm really passionate about is helping people develop relationships with time that feel supportive and empowering instead of stressful or oppressive.
Okay. One of the things I've observed about autism is I've actually had to meet people with different levels of the spectrum, and there are people you hear are autistic, and you're wondering, really? And then there's some people you hear are autistic, and you just see them and you know these people are autistic. And I think we need to keep um, raising awareness that no two people are the same. No two people
Yeah.
are the same at all. And
Yeah. And something that I have learned recently about the autism spectrum that's really helped me understand it differently is that a lot of times when we hear spectrum, we think of it like the electromagnetic spectrum, where it's like low on one end and high on the other, and there's a gradation from low to high. And with the autism spectrum, a lot of people talk about how there are 8 different aspects of autism, things like sensory sensitivities, emotional difficulties, social difficulties. And so each one of these aspects could have high needs or low needs. Each one of these aspects could impact the person in a severe way or in a not severe way, in a very mild way. And so what we're used to seeing as the stereotypical autism are people who their social difficulty is very high. And so then when we see people on the autism spectrum where their social difficulties are low, but they do experience a lot of other pieces of the autism spectrum, like uh, emotional difficulties or sensory sensitivities and things like that, then we might perceive them as not autistic because they don't have the social difficulties, but then we're not aware of what their internal or their personal experience is.
mhm. Okay, something new to learn. Thank you for sharing
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
information. I'd like to ask, what influenced your decision to start this season consulting?
Yeah, I love that question. So that's a little bit of a story, really. So in 2010, I was introduced to an organizational model that is based on the 4 seasons, but it divides each of the 4 seasons into an early and a late phase for a total of 8 seasons. Then for about 8 years, I worked in outdoor education where we would use that model to design our programming. We would develop the 8 seasons of the whole program, the 8 seasons of each week within the program, of each day within that week, sometimes of specific activities within the day. And we were also using that program to design the staff team, where instead of a team lead, we had somebody who was sitting in the north, and instead of a logistics person, we had somebody who was sitting in the south. So then we're
Okay.
using this organizational model in lots of different ways. So during that time, when I was doing outdoor education, I was also continuing to sell insurance on the side to help pay the bills because outdoor education doesn't really pay that well. And then in 2016, I started an insurance agency. And when I hired some friends that I knew through outdoor education, I mapped out what they needed to know about insurance on the seasons based model that they were already familiar with. So I was
Okay.
training them in the 8 seasons of a sale, the 8 seasons of client relationship, and things like that. And that led to me consulting some of my entrepreneur friends on applying this 8 seasons model to their business, which eventually led to me founding 8 Seasons Consulting in 2018.
And how has it been so far?
It's been really wonderful. I love connecting with people. I love helping people tune into a different way of relating to time. I often, in a lot of different ways, I think of neurodivergent people in the workplace or in society as canaries in the coal mine. I learned recently that that phrase, canaries in the coal mine, is very popular where I'm from in Southern Appalachia, but a lot of people around the world might not actually know what that means. So, canaries in the coal mine uh, during the days of coal mining, especially coal mining by hand, when people were deep in the coal mines, they would take canaries with them because canaries are sensitive to low oxygen levels and also sensitive to a poison gas that can be present in coal mines. And so if the canary passed out, then the people would know, like, oh, there's a problem here, even though we can't perceive it, it's time for us to get out. And so,
Okay.
in the same way, I feel like neurodivergent people are more sensitive to a lot of the things that are like problematic in
Mm-hmm.
society or in the workplace. And we see neurodivergent people being negatively impacted first, but really it's a systemic problem. And so being able to use this seasons based model to connect with neurodivergent people, connect with neurodivergent businesses, and help people establish relationships with time that are supportive and help them navigate the workplace and society in ways that really work for their brains and bodies. It's been a real blessing over the last 7 or 8 years.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I know you just talked about 8 seasons, but I still want to understand like a bit of specifics about what 8 season does.
Yeah. So, like I said, I help individuals and organizations flexibly structure time in ways that work better for everyone, especially work better for people with ADHD and or autism. So you can get more done in less time and have more capacity for everything else in life.
Okay.
Most of my clients come to me when they've already tried a bunch of other systems and methods, most of which worked for a while, but eventually took too much effort and willpower to maintain in the long run. So if other systems like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or these different methodologies, if we think of those as apps, this 8 seasons model is like an OS that makes everything else run more smoothly with
Okay.
less input.
Okay. That's perfect. I read the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and I found it quite engaging. But apparently, we taught the course on it, and like I said, it's part of the reasons why I had to start thinking about why people learned differently because I worked in a business school for quite some time, and when we taught about the course, we had majority of the class enjoying the majority of the students in class, they enjoyed the class and they were happy about it. They had a lot of feedbacks and they thought everything in there was realistic, and then we had a couple of people who thought, well, this was just not it for us. And then it made me start thinking, like, why is this different? Why was it different for them? And here we are today, still trying to find
Yeah.
solutions to ensure that, everybody is able to learn regardless of where they find themselves in, whether in the classroom setting or even in organizations where people are able to learn and build skills without feeling left out.
Mm,
And
mm-hmm,
I'll
mm-hmm.
come back to these 8 seasons because I'm quite interested in what you do.
Yeah, and
Um,
actually, so real quickly, as well as so primarily what I help people design as far as applying the 8 season cycle, what I primarily help them with is days, weeks, and work sessions. We
okay.
sometimes also get into um staff meetings, the 8 seasons of a staff meeting, and we also get into the 8 seasons of a facilitated workshop or the 8 seasons of a class. So that's actually something that you and I could talk about offline, is how this model applies to structured content like delivering a class module.
So does this structure work for only neurodivergents or it works for everybody?
So it really works for everybody. That's
Okay.
that's why I was talking a little bit about the canary in the coal mine example
Yeah.
earlier, is that the way that society relates to time is inherently disconnected from the natural rhythms of our brains and bodies, and it that has a negative impact on everyone, but the negative impact is so mild for most people that they don't really notice it. But then
Mm-hmm.
that negative impact can be really strong for people with ADHD or autism, and so they're actively looking for something like this. But in the same way that uh, in the United States, when we installed the curb cuts as part of the implementation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, one of the first things we did from that was to install curb cuts to make it easier for people with wheelchairs to use sidewalks. Well,
Yeah.
once we did that, we noticed that now the sidewalks are also more accessible for people with walkers and parents with strollers or people with
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of mobility issues. And so when we make the space more accommodating for the people with the highest needs, it inherently makes the space more accessible to everybody.
To every other
And in the
person.
same way, if we implement this system that some people really need, it ends up being really helpful for everybody.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So
Absolutely.
now we're going to be talking about executive function, and I think that's going to take majority of our questions.
Okay.
So when we talk about executive function as a mental operating system, what specific capacities are we referring to, and how do they show up in our daily lives?
Great question. So most people talk about there being 8 aspects of executive functioning:
Okay.
organization, time management, task initiation, impulse control, emotional control, self monitoring, flexible thinking, working memory, and planning and prioritizing.
Okay.
And so if we're thinking of executive functioning as these 8 different thinking skills, then everything that we do throughout the day requires some aspect of executive functioning.
Mm-hmm.
Getting out of bed in Getting out of bed in the morning takes task initiation. Eating eggs for breakfast instead of cake requires impulse control. And already having those eggs in the fridge took planning and prioritizing. Getting to the desk on time requires time management, task initiation, self-monitoring, planning and prioritizing, and sometimes it even takes emotional control and flexible thinking. So we're
True.
using some aspect of executive functioning anytime we're doing or deciding anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the more complex or unfamiliar the task or the decision is to us personally, then the more executive functioning it takes.
And requires true. 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 Okay. So what are the most common warning signs of stress, burnout, and decision fatigues based on your experience with people?
Yeah, yeah. So based on my personal experience and also the whole body of research out there about all 3 of these conditions, um, they are 3 different things. Stress, burnout, and decision fatigue are 3 different things, and there is some Venn diagram overlap of both their causes and their symptoms, but they are different. So I think it's helpful to talk about them as different things with some
Okay,
overlap.
perfect.
So first, let's talk about how they overlap, and then we can talk a little bit about how they're different. So the signs that they have in common are things like exhaustion. That's probably the biggest one.
Hmm.
Irritability, difficulty focusing, feeling emotionally numb, losing interest in doing the things that we love. The tricky part is that all of those things can also have other causes like depression, sleep deprivation, or grief.
Sure.
So the symptoms that they have in common, they also have in common with a lot of other things. And mental health clinicians, when they go to diagnose a mental disorder, they use a book called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or DSM. And in the DSM, the last line of each section says to make sure that the symptoms are not more easily explained by something else. So,
Okay.
before you diagnose somebody with ADHD, you're going to see if their lack of focus or their excitability or whatever their ADHD symptoms are, if it might be more easily explained by something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the same way, if we are feeling exhausted, irritable, unfocused, unmotivated, and we haven't slept well all week, we might see if some good sleep alleviates those symptoms before we diagnose ourselves with burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Simple stress also usually improves with rest and taking a break from the thing that's stressing us out.
Yeah.
Um, Beyond those signs that they have in common with each other and with a bunch of other conditions, let's look a little bit deeper at the unique signs of decision fatigue and burnout. So, decision fatigue adds procrastination, impulsivity, brain fog, regret over choices, and feeling overwhelmed by what others might think of as minor or easy choices. And all of that stems from making too many decisions. And keeping the cause in mind can be really helpful. Decision fatigue inherently means I've been making a whole lot of decisions. So if we're feeling overwhelmed by decisions, but we haven't had to make a lot of decisions recently, then it's probably not decision fatigue. It's probably
Mm-hmm.
something else. So burnout is a deeper level of depletion where even simple tasks feel overwhelming and it's hard to find motivation for anything.
Yeah.
Job performance suffers. We dread our responsibilities. We might feel detached or alienated, and we feel like nothing we do matters.
Mm-hmm.
And that might sound a lot like depression because there's a lot of overlap between the symptoms of depression and the symptoms of burnout.
Burnout.
The big difference between burnout and depression is what's causing it. So, burnout is primarily caused by something external, something about how we're living or working is consistently stressing us out and depleting our resources beyond our capacity to give. Whereas depression is primarily internal and it has more to do with how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about the world around us, rather than how the world around us might actually be.
Okay.
And it might be triggered by an external event or stressor, but it doesn't go away when that event resolves itself or the stressor is removed. It's very normal to feel sad when a loved one passes, but if we're still struggling with all the symptoms of depression, 2, 3, 6 months later, then that's something more than just typical grief.
Mm-hmm.
And so things can be triggered by an external factor, but if it doesn't go away when that resolves, then it might be something deeper. It might be depression.
Very well explained. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
So, I recently had someone say burnout does not exist, that it's just it's just an issue of inability to regulate the working structure. What is your opinion about that? I personally think that's a false statement.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's an interesting thought. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by regulate a working structure, or I guess what they meant by regulate a working structure?
Unfortunately, that was as far as the statement
Okay,
went.
okay. So, uh, so I might think of that as implementing a working structure, right? That we're just not using the right structure is kind of what I hear this person saying is like it's a failure to implement a structure that works for us. So I think that burnout and an inability to implement a working structure can exist simultaneously and even be caused by each other. Um, it might be helpful if we talk about mutual causality in the context of fatigue and then loop back around to burnout and see how it ties
Okay.
together. So, feeling fatigue could be caused by anything from a debilitating chronic illness to missing a few hours of sleep. Missing sleep also weakens the immune system. So, consistently feeling fatigued from a lack of sleep could lead to an illness, and that illness could then lead to fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
So, fatigue can be both a cause and an effect of an illness. In the same way, an inability to implement a working structure could be a cause of burnout or caused by burnout. So, what I mean by that is that if we're experiencing burnout, then we're going to struggle to implement a working structure. And
Mm-hmm.
if we consistently struggle to implement a working structure, that eventually could lead to burnout. Because the root cause of burnout is consistently overextending ourselves physically, mentally, and emotionally. And the cause of that overextension is usually workplace conditions,
Mm-hmm.
excessive workload, unclear expectations, ineffective structure, anything that leads to us consistently giving more than we have to give. So if we struggle with aspects of executive functioning like organization, task initiation, planning and prioritizing, then those workplace conditions are going to have an exponentially greater impact on us. So difficulties implementing a working structure could be one part of the conditions that lead to burnout. And if we're
Burnout.
already experiencing burnout, no matter what the cause is, then implementing a working structure becomes exponentially more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So telling someone who's experiencing burnout to implement a working structure is a little bit like telling somebody who just tore their ACL that the solution is to walk. Yeah, walking will be part of the recovery path, but there are a lot of other steps that need to be taken before we're
Mm-hmm.
ready for that. And trying to walk too soon can cause more damage and set back the healing process.
True.
So, do people experiencing burnout need to implement a structure that works for them? Yeah, of course. We all need a structure that works for us. But that's not the first step in the process of recovering from burnout. And trying to do that too soon can make the burnout worse and increase the limbic friction around structure so that when the time does come to implement a structure, it's actually much more difficult because of the limbic friction that we've built up around structure.
Thank you for the explanation. I learned I learned a few things from what you have just said. Thank you so
Yeah, you're
much.
so welcome. Yeah, it's my
Uh,
pleasure.
so I would also want to ask, to what extent can executive function skills like planning, emotional regulations, or working memory be trained? And what does the training look like?
That's a great question. So, like I was talking about earlier, I like to think of the 8 executive functions as thinking skills.
Okay.
Any skill can be trained with practice. And like any physical skill, different people have different natural capacities for different thinking skills. One
Mm-hmm.
person might be inherently born with 10 out of 10 organization skills, and another person might need years of practice to get to 5 out of 10. But if we're walking through daily life at a 3 out of 10, there are things that we can do to practice and train that thinking skill so that we can get to a 5 out of 10. And
Okay.
we might not ever get to a 10 out of 10, but being
Mm-hmm.
a 5 out of 10 instead of a 2 or 3 out of 10 is life changing. So how to practice each specific thinking skill varies by person and is a little bit much to try to get into in this conversation. But I will say that the easiest way to improve all of our thinking skills is to regulate our nervous system. A,
Okay.
a dysregulated nervous system interferes with all of our executive functions. And so regulating our nervous system is going to improve all of our thinking skills.
Mm-hmm.
So, usually, when we talk about regulating the nervous system, we're talking about down regulation, helping the nervous system calm down, relax, de stress. And that is a really important part of nervous system regulation, especially when we're feeling stressed and overwhelmed. And the part that we talk about less, but can be just as important, is up regulation. So, if we're experiencing depression, functional freeze, burnout, then our nervous systems can be too inactive, too much at rest. And we need to take actions to activate our nervous systems, actions like physical activity, social interaction, mental engagement. But to bring back the metaphor of the torn ACL, trying to walk when it's time for physical activity can cause damage, and trying to run when it's time to walk can cause damage.
Mm-hmm.
And so, exactly how much and what kinds of upregulation we need is pretty nuanced and individual to each person. There's
Okay.
not one right way or a universal step by step process to follow. It's
Okay.
more about tuning into what our brains and bodies need pushing them just beyond the comfort zone into the learning zone, but not pushing them beyond that into the damage zone. And
Mm.
just like if we're healing a torn ACL, every push beyond the comfort zone requires time and space to heal up in the comfort zone before we push again just beyond the comfort zone. And through that, we eventually expand our comfort zone.
Okay. I know this is part of what Eight Seasons does, trying to help entrepreneurs, manage their executive functions. And what has been the success rate so far? And how long does it take or what's the average range of training someone, um, or
Yeah.
let's say a group of people? What has been the average time used in training a group of people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have a curriculum that I work through with people,
Okay.
and depending on some different things, I usually do either a 3 month program or a 6 month program. I kind of prefer 6 months. I like going deeper with people in that container.
Okay.
Um, with my clients who go through the 6 month program, I have people take an executive functioning self assessment when people are onboarding. And that's not like a battery of questions where I'm trying to figure out how their brain works. They just tell me on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you do with organization? How do you do with planning and prioritizing? So they rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10. They tell me what their biggest struggles are. And then I use that information to help shape how I deliver the content to them, what skills we work on throughout our time together. And then when we're done, as they exit, they take that executive functioning self assessment again. And on average, my clients in the areas where they struggle the most, they see an average of a 3.5 points out of 10 improvement in the executive functions that they struggle with the most.
Okay.
And so, like I was saying earlier, if we're walking around with at a 2 out of 10 on time management, we might not ever get to a 10, but to go from a 2 out of 10 to a five and a
Five.
half out of 10,
Mm-hmm.
that's really life changing in how we
Yeah,
approach
that's
our
a lot.
business and our relationships and so many
That's a
things in our
lot.
life.
Okay. How can an individual design workflow, culture, or technology in a way that supports executive function instead of constantly depleting it?
Oh, that's a really great question. So the long answer is my whole body of work. Like everything that I put out is really an answer to this
To,
question. The simple answer is that we can design our workflows, our
mm-hmm.
days, weeks, our work sessions, every aspect of our lives in alignment with the natural rhythms of our brains and bodies.
Yeah.
What makes that
Design workflow.
right,
Yep.
design the workflow and our days, weeks, and work sessions, because that's something that happens too, is that people think of their workflow in isolation. So often when I start working with people, what they want to talk about first is their workflow. And I'm like, okay, but when do you go to bed? And they're like, well, I scroll on my phone until 1 a.m. It's like, cool, we have to start there. We can't start about like 9 a.m. when you're at your desk. We have to start talking about when you go to bed
When you
and
go
how
to
you
bed,
wake up and things like
when you
that.
wake up, what do
Right.
you do before you leave
Right.
for work and all of
Right,
that?
exactly. How do you wake up your mind in the morning? How do you wake up your body in the morning? So I think it's really important to consider the workflow in the larger context of the day and the week and everything else. Um, so it can sound really simple to say, well, design it in accordance with the natural rhythms of our brains and bodies, and that can sound really vague. This model is one pathway to that, and it's not necessarily the only pathway to it. Something that I say to my clients a lot. There's a quote from the Buddha where he said, my teachings are a finger pointing to the moon. Don't confuse the finger for the moon. Right. So he means like the moon is out there and it's really beautiful. I'm just trying to
Mm-hmm.
help you see that. Don't look at my finger. That's not the important part.
Yeah,
And
that's
in the
not the
same way,
important thing.
right. This system is one pathway to being more in touch with our brains and bodies, understanding what our brains and bodies need on a moment to moment, day to day basis, living in accordance with our natural rhythms. And so this system helps people get there. It's not about following the system step by step. It's not even really exactly a step by step system. It's more of a lens or a framework or an operating system that affects how we do everything else. And so in the same way, the goal is to live in accordance with our natural rhythms. This is a pathway that can help us get there. Don't confuse the finger for the moon, right?
Yeah.
Um, so what makes it difficult to live in accordance with our natural rhythms, the natural rhythms of our brains and bodies, is that society actively disconnects us from our brains and bodies, from our natural rhythms, and from what we actually need from day to day, moment to moment. Society, and especially the way that school is designed, the way that offices are designed, and the traditional 8 to 5 workflow, it's based on factory workers, which factory workers were really seen as just another cog in the machine. They're just another machine at the factory that
Yeah.
works on 8 hour shifts. And so it's very disconnected from the way our brains and bodies actually work. Um, so my work is about helping people and organizations structure their time in ways that support our nervous systems, optimize outcomes by aligning with our natural rhythms, and fit within that larger framework of societal expectations. Like we talked about earlier, the primary tool that I use for that, of course, is the 8 season system. The extremely simplified version of the 8 season cycle is that everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
And
And that might sound so broad that it's not useful, but I think if we look at some ways to apply the concept, I think it actually becomes really practical. So, if we need to work on a project around the house, we usually think of starting to work on the project as step one. But really, before that, we actually decide what to do. We feel
mhm.
motivated enough to do it, and we get together everything that we need to do it. That's the
True.
beginning. So then doing the thing is the middle. And then ideally, we pause, we rest, we put the tools and materials away, we reflect on what we did, we think about ways that we might do it better next time. That's the end. If working at our desk is the middle, then the beginning is making, reviewing, and prioritizing our task list,
Mhm.
making sure that we have the information we need, and ideally cultivating some level of inspiration and motivation. And then when we're done, the end is sending that work to whoever needs it, thinking about the impact that work is going to have in the world, checking it off the task list, seeing what our next priorities are. So building beginnings and endings into our days, weeks, and work sessions
Mhm.
helps orient our nervous system to the moment and focus on what's actually happening right in front of us. When we intentionally wrap things up, it's kind of like closing browser tabs in our brains, and it gives us back the mental resources that we had invested in keeping that loop open. Implementing something new usually starts with taking some kind of action. The first step I actually recommend is taking a break, making 10 minutes to rest and reset in the middle of the afternoon, or getting to bed at a time that works for our bodies. Starting with rest gives us more capacity to implement everything else.
I'll remember that. Start with rest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Thank you so
so many of my
much.
clients, when we start working together, they're caught in a cycle of I'm too busy to take care of myself.
True, that
Because
happens a
I'm
lot.
because I'm not taking care of myself, I'm not getting the things done that I need to get done. Because
Mm-hmm.
I'm not getting the things done that I need to get done, I don't have time to take care of myself. So they're in this loop, right? And so
Very
they
true.
come to me saying, well, how can I get more done so then I can have time to take care of myself? And I'm like, okay, well, the first step is actually pause and take care of yourself. And then you'll actually have the mental, emotional capacity to do the things that you need to do. And then you'll have more time to take care of yourself.
Thank you for sharing that. We've
Absolutely.
actually learned a lot from you. I personally have learned a lot and I've had to jot down.
Awesome.
Um, in their own words, how do you keep the audience motivated? So if someone is listening and saying, okay, yes, 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 this is right. But how do I keep going?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So, a lot of people that I talk to feel like they have a lot on their plate right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, they're pushing through this phase so that they can get to the next phase where they're going to have less on their plate. And then they'll have enough time to take care of themselves, engage in passion projects, connect with their loved ones more. The bad news is that your plate will always be full. There's not another phase coming where you're going to have less on your plate. But the good news is that your plate will always be full. There's not another phase coming. So we can go ahead and make time to take care of ourselves, engage in our passion projects, and connect with our loved ones right now. We don't have to wait for anything. We don't have to wait for the next phase. We can do all of that right now. And what I see over and over again is that when we make time to take care of ourselves, engage in passion projects, and connect with our loved ones, then we have that gives us back some of our executive functioning. When we feel more inspired and motivated about life, it's easier to feel more inspired and motivated about our work. If stress depletes us, joy refills us. So, how can we engage in activities that bring us joy?
Thank you very much. Um, Last question, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
call it a wrap. Can I know you work with entrepreneurs and
Mm-hmm.
organizations. Do you work with individuals too?
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to focus on entrepreneurs, but I have also worked with employees at organizations. I've worked with PhD students. I've worked with parents. So yeah, I'm open to different folks for sure.
And is it okay to put your organization's information on the podcast just in case someone wants to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, the name of like I said, the name of the organization is Eight Seasons Consulting. You can find me on all platforms, including TikTok and Instagram as Kai Eight Seasons. That's KAI, the number eight seasons.
Okay.
I have a lot of content on Instagram and TikTok. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn as Kai Northcott. That's Northcott, and Kai is KAI. And then there's also my website, which is the number eight seasons dot consulting, eight seasons dot consulting.
Okay. We'll definitely put all of that information at the bottom of the screen so people can
Awesome.
get all of that from. We want to thank them very much for being here with us today, taking up time. It was a bit of a short notice, but you pulled through for us.
Yeah,
We
it was
really
really my pleasure.
appreciate this being here with us. And like I said, we have learned personally, and I will definitely keep in touch with you because I have some questions I would like to ask. I just need to sit down and digest everything that I've heard and then come back to you.
Awesome. I
Um,
look forward to it.
Thank you very much for this session
You're so
and
welcome.
have a
Thanks so much for
wonderful
having me.
day.
Thank you, you too.
Right.